When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a fellow turns about when he might have won and he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup, and he learned too late when the night came down how close he was to the golden crown. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint in the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It might be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you must not quit. Anybody heard those words before? Familiar words to some. I remember hearing those words for the very first time when I think I was about 16 years old. And I went to a school which had a bit of a reputation. It was a bit of a tough school. I enjoyed most of it. There was a time when I felt, right, I need to get out, and at the age of 16 I left. But just before I left, I remember sitting in a school assembly, and I remember a school teacher reading that. I think he was trying to encourage us, those of us who were about to leave school, that yes, there might be tough times ahead, but you mustn't give up. And I was good. I kept hold of the thought, and I was thinking about it the other day when I found it at home. And the question comes often, when are you tempted to give up? When are you tempted to quit? When do the pressures get so great that you think, do you know what, I've had enough. I've had enough. That can happen in all sorts of spheres of life. I remember it. It may surprise you to know that I was quite hot-headed when I was younger. I'm not quite sure why you're laughing there, Mary. But yeah, I mean, I was quite hot-headed when I was younger, particularly sometimes in work. And by work, I mean the work I was doing before I went to Bible college. And there was one particular occasion. I was working for quite a large company, and I'd been feeling rather sort of frustrated by the way in which things were going. And I remember having a visit from my boss, and I remember him saying certain things to me, and I said, that's it, I've had enough. And I threw my company car keys across the desk at him, and I said, I've finished, I quit. And I walked out. And I was a bit hot-headed, and I walked home. And as I was walking up the road, my parents came along. Now, I was in my mid-20s with 3 children and a wife, and I was walking up the road, and my parents saw me, and they stopped, and they said, what are you doing? And I said, I've quit. And they said, oh, you better get in the car, we'll take you home. And I felt that big. Can you imagine that? I'd been such the tough guy in the office, throwing my keys across the desk, walking out, and then my mother picked me up on the side of the road. But it had got to a point where I thought, I've just had enough. What does it take? What needs to happen for us to just simply say, do you know what? I've had enough. I quit. The worst thing, of course, we can do is quit in relation to our Christian faith, but sometimes we feel like it. Let's be honest. We feel like giving up on prayer because God isn't answering. Things aren't happening the way we would like them to. The world seems to be an awful place, and we wonder. And the question I want to think about this morning, and we're going to read some words from Psalm 7 in a moment. What will have to happen for us to simply just say, do you know what? I have had enough. I've had enough. I want to give up. I want to give up. Sometimes it doesn't need anything to happen. It's just the fear of what might happen that causes us even to, if I can say it like this, to quit before we even start. To give up before we even begin something. Because we fear what might be in the future. We get anxious over the unknown. What will it take for us to say, do you know what? That's it. I want to read some words from Psalm 7, and I want to offer, I think, some wisdom from David. If ever we get to the place where we think, do you know what? I just want it all to just go away. I want to finish. I give up. Let me read these words from Psalm 7. O Lord my God, I take refuge in you. Save and deliver me from all who pursue me. Or they will tear me like a lion and rip me to pieces with no one to rescue me. O Lord my God, if I have done this and there is guilt on my hands, if I have done evil to him who is at peace with me, or without cause have robbed my foe, then let my enemy pursue and overtake me. Let him trample my life to the ground and make me sleep in the dust. Arise, O Lord, in your anger. Rise up against the rage of my enemies. Awake, my God, decree justice. Let the assembled peoples gather round you. Rule over them from on high. Let the Lord judge the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity, O Most High. O righteous God, who searches minds and hearts, bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure. My shield is God Most High, who saves the upright in heart. God is a righteous judge, a God who expresses his wrath every day. If he does not relent, he will sharpen his sword. He will bend and string his bow. He has prepared his deadly weapons. He makes ready his flaming arrows. He who is pregnant with evil and conceives trouble gives birth to disillusionment. He who digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit he has made. The trouble he causes recoils on himself. His violence comes down on his head. I will give thanks to the Lord because of his righteousness. I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High. You know, if we think about this idea of giving up, if we think about this idea of giving up even before we start something, are there lessons here that we can learn from this particular psalm? We've got no time, in a sense, this morning to do justice to everything that the psalm has to say. But I want to pick up a few things. When I look at the start of the psalm, and I read the title that's in the NIV, it says a Shiggaion. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but a Shiggaion of David. A Shiggaion, for best guesses, it's a musical reference. It's a musical term. A Shiggaion of David. It's a form of song which David sang to the Lord concerning Cush, a Benjaminite. Who on earth is Cush? Who's Cush? That he has caused so much anguish that David sings this way to God. Who on earth is Cush? The only reference to him is this. The only reference in the entire Bible to this man who has caused a real outburst of anguished prayer from David to God, the only reference to him and his tribe, the tribe is mentioned in many places, but the only reference to him and of coming from this tribe is here. This is all we know of Cush. What did he do in order to cause such anguish in the life of David? Nobody has any idea of who this man was. Nobody has any idea of what he did. In the judgment of history, he's a bit forgotten. He's big in these days, it seems, standing up to the king, the leader. He comes across as like the leader of the opposition. He seems to want to triumph over David, and David is angered by whatever it is going on. But of course he doesn't. And we're left wondering just who on earth was this guy? Who on earth was he? He's left nothing for us except the 4 letters of his name. That's all we have. But you know, that's not unusual for the Bible. That's not unusual for Scripture. There was a Samaritan village, and Jesus, it says, it was a Samaritan village who threw out Jesus. They threw him out of the village. But I bet you don't know the name of the village, because it's not mentioned. Nobody has any idea. We are told there were loads of people who turned against the Apostle Paul in Asia, but we don't know any of them. Paul wrote a letter to a church in Galatia dealing with a controversy, but we don't know the names of any of them who sort of brought that controversy about. If we come further into history, there were people described as the envoys of the Pope, and they sought to destroy Martin Luther, but nobody can name them. There were magistrates who put John Bunyan in prison. We don't know the names of the magistrates, but we remember John Bunyan. There were bishops who prevented Wesley and Whitefield from preaching inside churches. But we remember Wesley and Whitefield, but we don't know the names of the bishops who prevented them. You know, Spurgeon, who I'm very often quoting, was involved in something called the downgrade controversy. And he had loads of opponents. But the one who gets quoted is Spurgeon, not the opponents. If we want to find out more, we have to really, really sort of do our research and do our digging, because their names are not on the tip of our tongues. And yet, Cush lives on. Because Cush lives on in the lives of those who oppose God's people today. But who will God remember? Who will God remember this morning? You, who seeks to do the Lord's work, but sometimes, yes, it feels like I want to give up because it feels hard. Will God remember you, or will God remember the one who opposes you? Who will God remember? People can have their moment on the stage. People can come along and threaten our peace and make us want to give up on things. But don't you quit, because they won't be remembered by God. But if you are this morning, if you are feeling like, do you know what? It feels a bit of a struggle, this Christian life. I want to encourage you this morning with some of the things that we find here in Psalm 7. I want to encourage you to remember some things. I want you, first of all, to remember to go to the throne of grace. So, if it feels a little bit tough this morning, it feels like you want to give up on anything at all, go to the throne of grace. Because that's what David does here. He doesn't panic. There's this man, his name is Cush. Something is going on. But David doesn't panic. David isn't in despair. We know David's far from perfect. Nobody here, I think, has behaved as badly as David did. And yet, the wonder is that within the immensity of this universe, living on the speck of dust that we call planet Earth, David is able to cry out to an infinite, all-powerful Creator and say, save and deliver me. Save and deliver me. And he can call out and he can be heard. Verse 1. O Lord my God, I take refuge in you. Save and deliver me from all who pursue me. He believed that the living God could hear him and do what he asked. So this morning, go to the throne of grace. Believe that this God that we worship this morning, who created you, is able to deliver you. David is trusting here in God's loving care. David knew that nothing was too great for God's power. Nothing was too small for his pity. You know, the Bible is fascinated with how things begin and with origins. And in the last verse of Genesis chapter 4, we're told that at that time men began to call on the name of the Lord. It would make more sense if it had said, at that time men began to build houses, or it would make more sense that at that time men began to plow and grow plants, or they began to domesticate the animals, because all of these things were needed and all of these things were eventually done. But the first thing we're told is that at that time men began to call on the name of the Lord. Right at the beginning of human history, men cried out to God. That's what we do. That's what we should do. When tempted to give up, stop, not even start something, call on the name of the Lord. Call on the name of the Lord. Right at the beginning of human history, they called on the name of the Lord. They did it without the help of a missionary. They did it without the help of an evangelist. They did it without the help of an American or British influential missionary society. They called instinctively on the name of God, the name of Jehovah. They had a conscience, and they saw God's glory in creation, and they had problems, and so they called out to the Lord. They knew the promise that God would send the seed of the woman who would bruise the head of the serpent and so reverse all the consequences of the sin of their father Adam. They knew things, and in knowing certain things, they called out to God. So what do you know this morning? What do you know about God that's going to encourage you to call out to God? So don't quit. We go to the throne of grace. We remember that God has been, is, and will be the same. That what he has done in the past, he is able to do now and in the future. If we have a testimony, a story of God's grace in our own lives, remember that. Remember that. So remember to call on the name of the Lord. And then remember that life is long. Human life isn't lived immediately. Human life isn't lived all at once. God gives us on average 70 years on this earth, and during that period he gives us different seasons. If we remember what's written in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. A time to embrace, a time to refrain, a time to search, a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent, a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. And that's how it is in a groaning world. We know that we have to keep planting and watering and sowing. We're not promised immediate gratification. We don't get instant solutions to our problems. There's a time for everything. Sometimes you sit down and encourage maybe through the type of work that you do, that, think of a 5-year plan, think of a 10-year plan. I've been in those situations. Some of you will too. And we say to ourselves, you know what? I'm going to get to a certain point, and if I don't get what I want in that time, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to cut that moment off. I'm going to forget about it. But it's not like that. Life feels long. It is long. And if people like Cush or any other opponent come into our lives, remember that life is long. And David prays you, O righteous God, bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure. Life is long. Pray to God. Go to the throne of grace. Ask him for the things that you want. Recognize that this will not always be how it's going to be. These things pass. Be patient. Wait on God. I smile sometimes as we deliberately misquote what we say is the most comforting phrase in the Bible. And it came to pass. Things pass. Our worst days will come to an end. We will look back 6 months after our worst days and realize it has passed. It might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might take 18 months, it might take 2 years, but things pass. So remember to go to the throne of grace. Remember that life is long and that during that span of life, things pass. But also remember that life is short. I was talking to Ruth about this the other day. She asked me what were my plans for my funeral. It's not the most encouraging conversation to have on your wedding anniversary, but what's your plans for your funeral? Write them down, she said, so that I know. So that I know. And I said, okay, fine. And I wrote a few things down. And I said, you've got to promise me this, though. When we get to the hotel, or when you get to the hotel, nobody gets quiche. You can have a sausage roll. You can have some salad. But nobody gets quiche. You see, life is long, but life also sometimes feels like it's short. James, in the New Testament, speaks about life, I think, in a rather wonderful, sobering way. When he says, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money, why you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. I was out and about early this morning with the dog, and it's one of those mornings, when you breathe and you see your breath. But it's gone in an instant. It's gone in a moment. And James says that's what life is like. We are quickly aging. We really, really are. We are taking longer to get up out of the chair. We are walking more slowly. We are getting breathless sooner. And those healthy ones running past us on the road, we hit them. But we share this common fate. And one consequence of the brevity of this life is that no matter how long our life will last, we're never going to get the job done. We're never going to get the job done. Face up to that. The Christian is one of the few people on this planet who will die with the job undone. We're never going to finish our ministries. There's always going to be a lot left to do. Our lives are in process. We will leave problems behind us. They're to go in for the preacher. There's going to be sermons unpreached, big texts not explored. There are going to be Christians left unhelped, and that's okay. Because we're not the ones who get to complete the job. Christ will do that. We don't get to finish this thing. God will complete it. My vocation isn't to get the job done. That's not my calling. I live, I retire, I die, and it's half finished. My task is to address the duties that providence brings into my life now. Each day, big and small. And what about finishing off my enemies? They're probably going to survive me. But God will deal with that as well. Because it's his work. And so David prays here, arise, O Lord, in your anger. Rise up against the rage of my enemies. Awake, my God. Decree justice. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay, says the God of justice. So remember to go to the throne of grace. Remember that life is long. We've got time. But remember that life is also short. And we're just not sure. And it can feel a bit uncertain. And we're never going to get the job finished. And that's okay. And then remember that you're going to live forever if you're a Christian. Remember that whilst life might appear long some days or short other days, you are going to live forever. Stand on the seashore, look out. How far can you see? And don't say Weston-super-Mare. Look beyond Weston to the horizon. Because for the Christians, that's how far we look. We look to eternity. Everything we do here is done in the light of eternity. Our sufferings are seen in the light of the glory that will be revealed in us. Our enemies and our conflicts are set before eternity. There was a German philosopher, his name was Feuerbach. He said that Christianity was a religion of wishful longing, and Christians had conjured up heaven to create meaning in life, that there will yet come the judgment of the wicked, and there will be the vindication of the righteous after death. He said that if you take eternity seriously, then the present is unimportant. But I don't agree with that. Because the present is important. But we view it in light of eternity. Because if we view the present as unimportant, we won't treat people well. We sometimes won't treat ourselves well. If you understand, though, that you've been made in the image of God and for God and to be with God and to be like God, then the present moment is crucial. It is elevated, and trials are dignified, and justice will be done. Because we're living in a moral universe, and our lives and our actions and our words, they matter. They count. God, who is from eternity to eternity, rules here and now. So now matters. Now is important. You're not here by chance this morning. Nothing happens by chance. And so this very moment is important. There were those accusations made by this man called Cush against David, that he had done evil to those who were at peace with him, and that he had been a thief, and there was guilt on his hands. Was it true? What does David do? He looks to the God of the future and speaks about the things that are happening now. He looks to whatever his future is and the God who is there in that future waiting for him, but he views the moment, the now, in light of that. And he says, I will leave it in your hands, God. Let the Lord judge the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity, O Most High. David speaks with a conscience that is clear. In the original language of this psalm, there are words used which sometimes are not present in some translations, and it goes like this: O Lord my God, if I have done this and there is guilt on my hands, if I have done evil to him who is at peace with me, or if without cause have robbed my foe, then let my enemy pursue and overtake me. Let him trample my life to the ground and make me sleep in the dust. David is very aware of the if in his present life. If I've done this, if this has happened, then God, you've got every right to judge me. But I'm looking at the present moment in light of that future event. He called for God to punish him if any of the accusations that were made against him were proved to be true. God, punish me then, if in the present moment I have done any of these things. David is thinking in terms of a throne of judgment and a moment when he'll have to give account for the deeds that he'll do. And that's how we should view eternity. We are going to live forever, but there will be a judgment of the things done in the body. There's nothing, David says, can be hidden from the righteous God, because this God searches hearts and searches minds. So you know, these present moments have meaning. They are significant. These moments have the meaning of the God who made us in his image, who created our conscience, who has written the things of his law in our heart, who has imposed our values on our words and our deeds. Living forever means that we can handle better the times that we live in now. The crises even that we experience now. Because you know what? It's not going to be perplexity and injustice forever. So remember to go to the throne of grace. Remember that life is long and it feels long some days. But remember, there are other days when it feels too short. But also remember that we're going to live forever, and to live today with an eye on that eternal future. To fill your minds with God, then, is the last thing that I want to encourage you with this morning. Because what is this psalm ultimately about? It's not about Cush, it's about God. There are 20 references to God in this psalm. He's called the God, God is kind of alluded to as a God of grace who hears us When we pray, who answers us, who is a righteous judge, who searches minds and hearts, who is a sovereign protector. David says, my shield is God Most High, who saves the upright in heart. David has got this shield around him, and no weapon of Cush can penetrate it. It is God's glory to save all the upright in heart. And knowing that changes everything. Because knowing God changes everything. With a glorious sight of the eternal God, no one, not even you, will remember the troubles that you once had from anyone called Cush. David sets his heart on God, and so he comes to this glorious conclusion. I will give thanks to the Lord because of his righteousness, and I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High. So as much as I'm grateful to the teacher who read that poem out in that assembly, and as much as I appreciate the sentiments of it, my thought this morning is to encourage you. Go to the throne of grace. Just remember what life is exactly. It sometimes feels long. It sometimes feels short. But you're going to live forever. And fill your minds with the God who has saved you in Jesus Christ, whose death we will remember in a moment at this table.